Now, Volvo has multiple manufacturing plants, one in Sweden, one in Belgium, two in China, and this lovely guy is made in South Carolina in the United States. Kind of surprised me to know that. But when you look at the exterior and the overall proportions of this, it seems more European, more German to me. From certain angles, I see, well, the 3 Series, and other people have mentioned other vehicles. And I think the main thing, unlike many Volvos, you don't need to grab your blankie because this does not put you to sleep like so many of the old vehicles in the past. They haven't gone so conservative that they stripped out every single piece of character here. Things like the headlights, some of the angles on the side, the mirror design, the taillights. I mean, this is a pretty striking looking vehicle without making it too conspicuous. And it doesn't hurt to have this orangish red paint either. But enough of that. Let's take a look at the interior space because that's pretty much why you would buy this. All right, let's get on the inside of the S60. Now, I talked about this with VW and Audi. They're trying to do the same thing, a modern, clean interior space. And the problem with those vehicles, no matter what they do, is they feel very sterile, almost generic. And Volvo's trying to do the same thing. They want that clean, almost sterile design, but it doesn't feel that way. This feels almost like artwork, like somebody legitimately spent like a year trying to design this, from the stitching on the upper dash, the way that the whole entire upper dash is designed, and then how it flows down to the middle. And there's a leather there. And then you have alloys, true alloys, not like plastic trying to look like metal along the whole center dash that leads to these alloy grill, speaker grills that I think a lot of manufacturers are going to start copying. Pretty much everywhere where your line of sight is where they put all the money. And it's super smart because below that point, I mean, it's just regular plastic, but it doesn't feel totally low rent. And I think that's what you're going to find pretty much in every Volvo. But the S60 here with this R design package feels like a very special place. And one of my favorite parts about it is the audio system, the Bowers & Wilkins, which continues to be pretty much the best audio system you can get, I would say, under $90,000. It impressed me in the XC90 and the other models, and this is what I've spent the most amount of time doing in here, is just listening to music and appreciating the space. And I think if you're going to get it, if you're going to get this car, that's one of the things you absolutely should have, aside from kind of the upgraded motor. All right, let's cover some of the good things before I move on to the bad. The first thing with the T6 is they've kept a physical shifter, a mechanical shifter. So when you go into gear, click, click, click. You know exactly what gear you're in. You don't have to look at a screen. There's no guesswork. You feel where you're at. It's amazing. Now, if you go to the T8 with the hybridization, then they go to a digi-stick. It's just a joystick, and I hate that. So this is one of the reasons why to go with the T6 or the lower models. The next thing they've done, and this is a huge gripe of mine in this car, and still is the infotainment. They finally increased the processor speed in here, and it's sped up the entire operation. Now, it's still slow to boot up. When you get in on a cold start, your HVAC controls are not completely accessible right away, but overall, the smoothness of the operation getting around is much quicker than it used to be. The negative part, and I talk about this a lot, well, if you have last year's model, you don't get these updates because you can't just swap in a processor from this to the old one, so you're kind of stuck. And Volvo is going to be completely changing this and going with an entire new OS and processor setup, I believe, in the next year. So that's a positive and a negative. The next thing is, well, it's kind of a positive and a negative. I love these seats. The seats are amazing. However, I've had problems with adjusting them. They are reluctant to adjust. Forward and back sometimes, even in park, when I'm driving and I want to make a small tweak, it just doesn't work. And I don't know if it's an electronic bug, because you can also adjust some things in the infotainment versus the side of the seat. But if it was working, I really like these seats. But the problem is you don't get the R design, you don't get cooled seats in here, or the massaging feature, which they include on, I believe, the Inscription model. So if you want those two things, well, you're not going to get it in the R design. Now we're going to take a quick look underneath of the S60. And this is a part of Volvo's new global architecture, the SPA platform. And believe it or not, this is shared with vehicles like the XC90 and the XC60 SUV. And you might be wondering, how is that possible? This is a car. Well, this is what manufacturers are doing now. They're taking a global platform or architecture and they're able to scale it, change things, and build more models off that core piece. It's all about modularity. It's about cost savings and efficiency. Volvo might have taken them 10 years to make 3 different cars if they did individual different architectures. In this case, they can keep churning them out and making subtle changes, improvements to them without totally breaking the bank. And if you do it right from the start, and I say this a lot, the vehicle can be great. In the case of the S60, you have an all aluminum knuckle, which is this whole area here. You have aluminum lower control arms, uprights, and this is a double wishbone suspension all the way up to the upper A-arm. Now this has electronic dampers in the front and in the rear, and that is tied to the drive mode, so it can kind of go soft to firm. Now let's take a look at the middle part of the car or towards the rear. In the back of the S60, some of this is of course going to be shared with like the XC90. Now the big difference here with the T6 model is this does not have air suspension or air ride. So what you're going to see right away is the electronic dampers, but inside this control arm is a mount for a composite leaf spring. This does not have coil springs. And the interesting part about this, there's not too many manufacturers that do this anymore. This is kind of very much like what you would see on a Corvette. Now, this composite beam is not load bearing, so it's not having to do a lot of work. So what you're getting is lightweight. You're getting, again, it's about modularity and packaging. They don't have to figure out how to jam a coil spring in here, and subsequently the ride can be better. Now, we could argue that, of course, but I'm going to tell you one thing, and you're going to see this in the drive. I had no idea this had a leaf spring rear end. No idea. And I could not tell driving it. In fact, I think this thing drives amazing if, obviously you're driving on the street. I have not had this on a track, nor would 99.9% of people. But as a street car, this works. And of course, there's other things in play here. You have, again, aluminum lower control arm. You have a Volvo collaboration with Borg Warner to do a Haldex style rear differential because this is all-wheel drive. And part of the magic of the handling of this vehicle is, again, the ability to have all-wheel drive and the fact that it can transfer torque smoothly and the power to the back to give you more of that rear-wheel drive feeling when you're driving hard, and then pretty much keeping it front-wheel drive for efficiency. Now, let's take a look under the hood. Under the hood of the S60 T6 R design. Now, if you're going to opt for it, you're going to get this 2-liter engine, which is pretty much the only engine you're going to get. Now, the differences are in power levels, and whether you get a turbocharger or a supercharger and a turbocharger on it. In this case, you have both. Now, I talk about this a little bit more in the XC40. The main reason why there's only a 2-liter and not a V6 and all that is these are designed to be sold in countries where you get taxed based on displacement. So obviously, they're trying to make this work in multiple countries, not just, of course, the US or places that don't have to deal with that. So in the US, we only get a 4-cylinder. And in this car, unlike the other Volvos I tested, I finally understand the point of this. Because in a lighter vehicle like this, it feels so much better. It feels so much more powerful, which I'm going to talk about in the driving bit. But it has this level of refinement, but also at the same time, it doesn't have a lot of sound. In fact, it doesn't have enough sound, honestly. I mean, and you can tell, like Scott said, this entire engine cover is like a pillow. You could take this off and lay down on it. It's that soft, and I'm not kidding you. So there's so much sound deadening going on because it's trying to be a luxury car, but it's also one of the things that makes it sound like just a giant vacuum cleaner when you're driving it. But to be totally honest with you, as much as I like this, this is a vehicle, at least in the next 10 years of Volvo's life, I would have to lease this because of the complexity of this engine with the turbocharging, the supercharging, and then of course you go with the T8, you add an electric motor, the hybridization of it. I would absolutely have to lease this just given the complexity of it. And then if you don't have problems going on, then maybe you could buy it out. But that's the way that I look at this. From a technology perspective, it's pretty impressive what they were able to do here. But enough of that, let's take this for a drive. Setting off in the Volvo S60, this has been a huge surprise to me because I spent so much time in their SUVs, the XC90, the XC40, the XC60, and all of them have this similar presentation from exterior design to interior design. Now, this is the first modern S60 with the SPA architecture, so it's carrying over kind of the chassis, the underpinnings from the XC90 and the XC60. And what you get is a much smaller package. You get a much more nimble feeling car that is smaller, it's more agile, and this turbocharged and supercharged motor no longer feels like it's lugging around way too much weight. In fact, this is the biggest surprise for me, because obviously you know that less weight means better things for driving, but I've enjoyed this car so much. It is so quick, it is so eager to turn, and just driving, even through turns, it's like, it doesn't feel like any other Volvo I've driven. And granted, this is the R design model, so it's a little bit tarted up. It's giving you more of that sporty presentation on the interior and exterior. But this car, and I think I said this in some other video, this is the best modern Volvo I've ever driven. And you know, if you're on the fence between getting like an SUV, maybe even though you don't need an SUV and you want to drive one of their modern cars, this is the car to get into. I'd be shocked if you got out of this and you're like, well, I'm going to take the SUV instead, especially if you don't need the additional space. That's how good it is. Finally, the supercharged and turbocharged motor feels like you have over 300 horsepower in here. It's an instantaneous surge of power whenever you hit the throttle. And when you hit the brakes, unlike a lot of modern cars that I've been into, the brakes are really progressive. It's not an on and off switch where you feel like it's synthetically boosting the brake pedal to give you all this power. You can just get into it a little bit and it progressively stops. If you want to get into it harder, you push it harder. It's just not always, I'm gonna hit my head on the steering wheel whenever you stab at the brakes. Now, when you come to a stop, I mean, I'm just gonna put this in dynamic mode. I usually just drive in comfort, but I'm not even gonna use manual mode. All you have to do is hold the brake a little bit, get on the throttle. It feels so good to drive it. I'm so impressed with this car overall. And the all-wheel drive system in here is pretty damn good. It doesn't feel like you're getting an insane sense of understeer. And when you're in the slippery stuff, and I got this car in the snow, and it's got summer tires on, so it's pretty much useless, but it was a really good test to see how well the all-wheel drive system handles transferring power to the back. And what it felt like, namely with the traction and stability control off, it is able to send a large amount of its power to the back. So it gives you this more rear-wheel drive feeling than front-wheel drive. And that's part of the enjoyment that I'm getting from driving this. Because you have the supercharger, you don't get the turbo lag when you start off. Especially if you do a little bit of brake torquing, it's instantaneous power and torque. The turbo kicks in and it's power all the way to the red line. Now, the only other thing to really talk about in terms of drivability is the 8-speed automatic, which this is an ASIN unit, and it is not the fastest shifting automatic. This is more of a cruiser. It's quick and responsive in automatic mode, but poor in any type of manual control. And I think this is where it's losing a lot of ground to the German competition like Audi and BMW. Their ZF transmissions or their 8-speed automatics are much, much better. I would say that this is somewhere in between kind of like what Genesis is doing and the Germans. If you're big on transmission speed, you're not gonna like this, but if you like smoothness and good automatic programming, I think you're not gonna find too much to complain about here. Now, in terms of driving comfort, this is a difficult one to judge. I just got out of a Lexus LS, which is one of the most quietest cars pretty much you're gonna get into. It's so refined, but it says a lot for the S60 because this is still pretty quiet. It's what you would expect for the price range, and it's an extremely refined ride quality. It's not the softest car, which is why it's good to drive more aggressively and why I like to drive it a lot, but it's not so overly firm that on broken pavement, you're annoyed at it. And I've been in luxury cars where they try to make it too sporty, more oversprung, stiffer, and it takes away from the driving experience. And that's why this car does such a good job. The brake programming's good, the steering's good, the all-wheel drive system isn't a total joke. The performance in terms of engine power output is great for the weight, and the transmission finds a pretty good balance between sport and luxury, and that's a huge highlight of the S60. Definitely check this out. But let's get on to the final thoughts. Final thoughts on the new Volvo S60. And as the title suggests, it is a mixed bag of greatness. Now, I've driven 3 different Volvos recently. One made in China, one made in Belgium, and this one made in South Carolina. And one of the best parts about that is there's no lapse in quality, no perceivable quality. And they all felt solid, they were all well built, the fit and finish was good, the underbody didn't look like somebody had a field day throwing adhesives everywhere. It just looks very clean, undercoatings are good. And I feel confident in pretty much all of them, regardless of where they're made. Now, in terms of drivability, that's where this is a highlight, because you take all the good things about the XC90 and the bigger SUVs and you've shrunken it down into a car. And this car drives far superior to the SUV counterparts in terms of handling, ride quality, steering, and acceleration, of course. Less weight, better performance, and now you truly feel what that supercharger and turbocharger setup is doing. It's going to be faster than most people need. Now, the best part about the car, the greatest part about this car is its interior space and design. And this is done by a team that knows what they're doing, free of gimmicks, free of trying to cheap out. There just doesn't feel to be any cheapness in here. And any place that has like glossy materials is just to balance the other types of materials they're using. And again, if you've never been in a Volvo product, a new one, check this out. I think you'll be impressed. Now, here's where the negative parts come in. Complication. I would not want to purchase a car like this with this engine design. It is asking for trouble long-term if you keep your cars for a long term, and I would say you have to lease this, or you just have a ton of disposable income to repair it when it comes time to do that. The next thing is the infotainment. The electronics are overbearing on this car, and it's that's the mixed bag of it. They haven't figured out how to do interior design and separating the mechanical controls of electronics from all the touchscreen stuff. You're in the touchscreen way too much. You know that this is like going to be a last generation design soon. And I think that's why you would have to look at this as big picture. What would you want to do? If you're going to lease it and dump it in 3 years, you're going to love this car every day you get into it. If you're planning on keeping it long term, you need an extended warranty, or plan for it's going to cost more to own this long term, and you got to make sure that that infotainment is something you can deal with, namely if you're older and you're not tech savvy. But other than that, a lot of this is a repeat from all the cars, but this is just one step above because it's affordable or more affordable as an entry level or a luxury car, and it does all the good things that Volvo does, including safety. Thanks for watching this. I'll see you next time.
This savage geese, I hate him. I'm gonna show you how to get back at him on Yelp and all that other stuff.